Hello, I'm Nicholas Kitchen. I'm the first violinist of the Borromeo String Quartet. I'm also on the faculty at the New England Conservatory of Music and the artistic director of the Heifetz International Music Institute. It's my pleasure to welcome you to my practice space to just share with you a little bit of an inside perspective on absolutely magnificent work of Beethoven, Opus 127, the string quartet in E flat. I have in front of me a PDF file of Beethoven's manuscript of this piece, and our group has ended up having many inspirations that come from this particular document that sort of exceeded our expectations. I think any manuscript of any composer is so fascinating to see because it's almost impossible that it doesn't show some of the traces of the decisions that they made, the things that they evaluated. So often there are cut sections or there are things that were, you can see how they were changed. But with Beethoven, even though all those things are true, there also seems to be some way that he worked with these pages, and my guess is that it was a way of him organizing for himself how he felt about some of the more subtle gradations of how the piece was going to unfold. And whatever the case is, he made fine distinctions between various seeming levels or approaches to dynamics, and he showed it in a way that's very much visible in these manuscripts. Now, if it was one manuscript, that might be something we could say was a accident or a experiment of that moment. But actually what I'm about to share with you is a set of markings that show it in basically every important work from 1802 to 1827. So that's really almost all the works that we love so tremendously of Beethoven, his great works for each of the different areas of music making. Well, let me just show you this first page. And you hear, this is one of the most glorious openings of a string quartet. The maestoso, these rich chords, these energetic staccatos and sforzandos. But I just call your attention to the fact that the first violin does not have what we normally think of as the mark for forte. If you look closely, it in fact is not just F, but F-O. Well, maybe one thinks, oh, that could be just an accident of the pen. Well, anyway, there it is. And you also see that all those eighth notes in that first line have so much energy in the staccato marks, and in fact, those are really quite long marks for staccato. Well, let's just hold on to those ideas. Of course, there's this magical transformation into the tenoramente, and then we enter into this lulling music that's so beautiful after the magnificent sort of edifice of the first chords. Well, let me just say, we're just going to look at the first movement right now, but this is there's hundreds of details in all of the movements, but for now, let's just concentrate on the first one. There are three gateways that sort of organize this movement, and I think the audience senses them very strongly. There's the E-flat gateway that we've just looked at. Then another gateway is in G major, equally wonderful, and both of those are in the forte range, even though I've showed you this sort of unique F-O marking. But both of those are basically forte. And then the third gateway is in C major, and it is, in fact, in fortissimo. Just mark FF and hold on to that idea because that will become relevant. Well, this music unfolds, the parts wind in the most gorgeous way. But it's not long before we encounter another one of these special markings, and I'm going to show it to you right now. And this is, the quartet has made a crescendo, and now we're going to use these third beat syncopations. And what you see is that the cello has this fabulously energetic arpeggio, but what does Beethoven put on that third beat where everyone is doing the syncopated third beat forte, but the cello seems to be asked to do something even a bit more? Because do you notice, just like the opening, that is FO. Okay, well, again, let's hold on to that thought. But we've had two expressions of something that is rather different than what we normally see in the print that we work with. Now things change, and in the next page you see these kind of tiptoeing staccatos, and we end up heading towards this very haunting G minor second idea. And I would like to point out to you on that idea, look at the swells that are going to the third bar there. You may notice that they don't look like the swells that we have in printed music. They are, in fact, diamond shaped. They're connected in the middle. If one looks at Beethoven manuscripts, you start to see that really, I would say, most of the swell pairs look exactly this way. Sometimes he even corrects to make absolutely sure that they are connected. Now, we might think that doesn't matter, and it could be interchangeable with when they're disconnected, except that Beethoven, in fact, has many instances where he chooses to make them disconnected. Well, what does that mean? I think in this case, it means that that beautiful four bars is one idea that has a swelling of expression at the point where that diamond reaches its widest point. When they're separate, I think it's also an expressive surge, one that goes up, and then a separate, distinct one that goes down. Well, anyway, as you see on this page, especially the one for the cello at the end of the page, Beethoven's quite energetic about the way he marks these swells. Well, we move on, and then we reach a cadence that kind of sums up the first section of the music, the first exposition idea, or maybe the first big paragraph or set of paragraphs in what he's saying to us musically. Well, I'd like you to look at that cadential bar. It has a rather audacious jump in the first violin and the trill. And how is that first violin marked? Well, not FO, not F, but FOR. Well, this is an important kind of closing point for the music in this movement. It's quite interesting to me that there's this choice to mark the FOR. Now let's look a little further. I mentioned the different energies of staccato. Well, look at the second violin part. That is quite small staccato. And the viola seems to be a bit larger. And the cello, I would say those are really large, though they're a little bit messy. But certainly the second violin and the cello are really quite different, the way the staccatos are marked. Well, again, let's hold on to that thought, and we're going to get to a similar cadence at the end of the movement. And what I'll at least show you that I love so much is Beethoven has taken these two cadences, which are quite similar, not marked them the same way, and by doing so, seem to indicate that he is investing more in that second cadence, that it's summing up an even larger set of music. But we'll get to that in a moment. Well, when this happens, there are these sort of breast chords and then these floating tenuto answers, and breast chords again, and the floating tenuto answers. And then I mentioned that gateway in G major. Well, here we are at that gateway. But the moment before that gateway, I'd like you to see it on the page. Do you notice that it's not just pianissimo marked by 2 Ps? Well, that is what it is in the first violin, but look at the second violin and the viola and the cello. First of all, you see that Beethoven worked quite hard to find out what exactly he wanted the cello to do. He decided the cello was not going to do a trill, but was going to do something that was perhaps a little more defined about the way things were going to turn around into these magnificent G major chords. Well, what's marked here is not 2 Ps, but 2 Ps with 2 lines on the stem. And this is a moment where, whether it was marked differently or not, there's a great sense of suspense and tension that is released by these magnificent G major chords of the second gateway. Well, what that 2-line pianissimo marking is one that shows up in so many wonderful places in Beethoven. One of them is the very opening of the Ninth Symphony, when the orchestra is just shimmering with expectant energy. Well, here it's that same shimmering, expectant energy. It just happens to happen in 2 quarter notes right before the G major gateway. Well, we do a similar kind of interwoven, beautifully sweet counterpoint now in the middle section. It takes different directions harmonically. And in fact, as we look at the manuscript, it gets to a point where the cello is on C string. And the cello is going to do that theme that was so tender, that tenoramente theme. But it's going to come up from the bottom. And I'd like you to look at that moment, because in fact the cello, once again, very energetically, has that very special 2 Ps with 2 lines. Again, what I've found by, in a sense, trial and error, is that Beethoven keeps putting that mark on moments that have incredibly high intensity, great softness, but this sort of emotional glow. Well, this is very appropriate to this spot. And even more exciting when you consider how the music turns around. Now, there's a blank page in the manuscript, so Beethoven had written a lot more music. And when I say blank, I shouldn't really say blank. It's been pasted over. He must have written quite a bit of music and decided it just wasn't necessary. So in fact, he pastes it over. And what we have is this almost explosive transition from 2 Ps with 2 lines at the bottom of the cello. And then what I'd like to point out to you here is the crescendo. And then we arrive at something which is one of the most exciting markings that Beethoven uses in his manuscripts. And that is FFMO. And I think you're seeing a pattern that what I'm noticing or pointing out to you is that in these manuscripts, Beethoven seems to like to register when something has greater importance by manipulating either the number of letters in it or something about the way it is notated. Often 2 lines actually stands for an abbreviation, and that may be a way of his kind of accessing what would be larger words of piano and pianissimo, in a sense abbreviating the longer form to show it's more important. Whatever the case, you will find in his music that he doesn't just use 2-line pianissimo, he also uses 1-line pianissimo. You might remember the very haunting beginning of Opus 132. Well, the cello part right at that beginning is 2Ps, but it's 2Ps with one line. When the whole group joins in the phrase on the fifth bar, in fact, what happens there is that the entire group, all four instruments, have 2Ps with two lines. Well, here we are manipulating the letters in a different way. We are taking fortissimo and we're taking that last two letters, MO, and sliding them over next to two Fs for fortissimo. Interestingly, Beethoven does seem to do, has a polar set of opposites. FFMO is on the loud spectrum, and its exact paired opposite is PPMO. I guess the same principle of those two letters moving over. PPMO is also at incredibly special moments. We won't go into the last moment, but I'll tell you that the glowing music of 6/8 that's at the coda, when it arrives finally in E flat major and in many spots around there, all four instruments are marked PPMO. What I'm kind of expressing to you is once you start noticing these, they very much align with instincts that one develops as a player. And it is particularly thrilling to feel that what you are feeling is in fact being explored and organized in Beethoven's mind as he sorts through what this great and huge work, how it should be felt in its dramatic flow. Well, here we are at FFMO. There are three FFMOs in the entire piece. This is one of them. The other one is in the third movement, the second time the group goes yang gadum badum 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 badum, this kind of furious passage. And the third one is in the last movement, right at the moment the quartet goes yan dun ti yan dun ti. I think you may see that I'm quite fond of what these markings seem to be asking me and us to do. These are fabulous moments in the music, and this one is no exception. Da, rum, rum, rum. We exchange these sort of ferocious chords, and I think you can see in the cello part we have these rising eighth notes, and those are about as big as staccatos can get. There are a lot of letters where Beethoven got very upset about people not being careful about how he treated staccato. Sometimes that's come down to a wisdom about dots and strokes, something that we certainly see in Mozart, and in Mozart's case, we see it in the editions that we read. In Beethoven's case, and by the way, in Haydn's case as well, it seems that their treatment was more complicated. So what you're looking at here is really the largest staccato, and I think that size of staccato is really expressing to you something about the energy that's in the note, the energy that's in the attack. And as they become smaller, it has less of that energy. This is not really about the length. So someone might have a smaller staccato, someone might have a larger, and that larger one is communicating something about the energy, and it's often sent in that form to the cello, which of course has a marvelous effect on the energy of the group. Well, here is that first FFMO of the piece. And this is just a riotous passage where we pass around these rum, 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 and the arpeggios are going and everything is spinning and we're moving through different keys. And this is the way that he prepares that third gateway. And it is this energy that then turns the corner and lands us in these magnificent fortissimo chords of C major. Now that's a great moment where we get to that third gateway, but I think Beethoven is actually, it's somewhat self-evident that it has that grandeur. The FFMO energy is more about this tremendously excited preparation for that arrival on what we could say is irregular, if there's any such thing, fortissimo of the third gateway in C major. We come out of this and we go into one of the most uh, strange, but in a wonderful way, parts of this entire piece, where that beautiful dee dee da figure is now fragmented and sent all around the group, and it's chopped up and moving to different places, and it's going through sequence and going through keys. That is Beethoven's way of preparing us for the return, the recapitulation. And all of a sudden, out of all of that, all of those shards of chaos, we turn the corner and we find ourselves back where we were at the beginning of the piece. The same setting, the same tonality that allows us to really feel the beautiful sweetness of this music. Well, in many ways, the recapitulation follows patterns that are related to the exposition, but it does work in different ways, as is always the case between expositions and recapitulations. What I will take you to now is that cadence that I was talking about, because this, just like in the first section where that cadence sums up all that's been happening in that first major section, the exposition, this is going to sum up all that's been happening in the recapitulation. And this happens a lot in Beethoven manuscripts, especially when you're tuning into the markings that are in the manuscript. So often, when a similar item comes back, he basically takes whatever the energy of the first time was and he tops it. He brings it one level higher. Well, that certainly seems to be the case here, because you might remember the first cadence had FOR in the first violin, regular F in the other instruments, small staccatos in the second violin, large staccatos in the cello, something in between in the viola. Well, here we are at the final cadence, and I would like to show it to you. I think you see the first violin's quite similar. It's FOR, that similar audacious jump and syncopations and the trill. But the other three instruments, they really have moved up quite a bit in the way that they have been intensified through the marking that's in the manuscript. Because I think you see quite clearly that all three of them have FO, just like the first violin had at the very opening of the piece. And I think you also see that all three, second violin, viola, and cello, all three have the largest and most energetic staccato markings. Well, I would say that definitely brings up the energy and tops what had happened in that first cadence. And I'd just like to mention for a moment, sometimes I bring up these things, and of course one point of view is that, oh, that must have happened by accident. Beethoven is so messy, which there's certainly some truth to that. But I do ask you to look at this and just ask yourself, was it really possible to mark FO in that way 3 times by accident? I don't think so. I think it's a wonderful way that Beethoven was aligning and shaping and organizing for himself the topography of what the musical energies would be that would hold this entire piece together. Now, I might be right or might be wrong, but there you are looking at the markings. There they are in his hand. There's no question that they're there. You might come to a completely different conclusion and decide, well, I don't think that means anything. I haven't come to that conclusion. And I know our quartet just loves to come to that cadence and try to do something that even goes a little further than what we did the first time. Well, we turn around from this, and there are not going to be any more gateways, but there's going to be a wonderful turning D to D flat, and then we sort of go into this heavenly spinning, which just sort of carries us through the coda of the piece. And we're just taking that initial tenoramente idea and we're just kind of rolling through it and taking it up and down scale tones and passing it around, ornamenting it. Beethoven gives us these very warm and wonderful crescendos. And eventually the first violin reaches up to the full height of the register of the instrument. Even at the same moment that the cello is reaching to the bottom, it's just a glorious writing. It's just hard to believe how beautiful this coda of this movement is. And after all of this, we have one diminuendo that is at the end. And this is kind of interesting too, because it's a very beautiful jump G on the pitch G for the first violin, and it gives us the last rendition of the Tenoramente theme. And Beethoven incredibly consistently marks his diminuendos D-I-M-I-N. And this is just, you can find hundreds of them that way. There was a point in his life before which he was equally consistent about D-E-C-R-E-S. But that turning point seemed to be right around Opus 56. For crescendo, he always marked C-R-E-S. And again, over and over again, exactly the same way. Well, this last diminuendo seems to get some special energy, because even though second violin and viola have dimin, the normal form, the first violin gets the whole word diminuendo, and that's what prepares that last statement of the Tenoramente theme. What I love is then we have these tender kind of exchanges, and the very last one, you see that cello and viola have that wonderful energy that seems to come from the two-line pianissimo. This actually is something that a lot of works have. I can point to the first movement and the second movement of Opus 111, but there are many, many others where that moment the movement says goodbye is the moment Beethoven chooses to have that two-line piano or pianissimo. Again, how can I say how much we as a quartet welcome that invitation to just put something special at that moment? It just couldn't be more perfect. And of course, that is the case of this whole movement. What we get used to traversing this musical landscape of the Beethoven string quartets, but I really do try to remind myself what an absolutely unbelievable gift Beethoven gave us by devoting himself to every single exquisite detail of this magnificent music. Thanks for listening. I hope that this has provided something interesting to think about in the many journeys we have with this music. Again, thank you, Beethoven, and thank you, CelloBello, for bringing us all together, learning more about chamber music.